A children's theme park that closed in the 80s may be revived in Ellicott City. A member of the Friends of Enchanted Forest says the group is working on a plan for reopening the park that they'll present to its owner. The members will be doing research by visiting other such parks. Richard Holmes takes us down memory lane to when the park was in its heyday in Pages from the Past.
For over 30 years, the Enchanted Forest on Route 40 in Howard County's Ellicott City provided the young and the young at heart a storybook land of fairy tales come true. The Enchanted Forest was created in 1953 with exciting places to visit and familiar nursery rhyme characters to see. You were tempted to nibble some of the icing from Hansel and Gretel's gingerbread house. You could go on the teacup ride and see how the adventurous Alice in Wonderland became ensnarled in her many fabulous adventures deep underground. The young visitors were able to take the safari ride through the mysterious jungle with wild animals all around, ending at a friendly native village. You traveled by pumpkin coach to Cinderella's castle and explored the animated displays inside, or took an exciting water ride through Alibaba's treasure cave, or cruised on the tugboat Little Toot around the lake past Robinson Crusoe's island. And there was a ride with Mother Goose and her goslings, and little antique cars on the speedway, which provided fun means of transit. Howard County's Enchanted Forest provided great fun and unforgettable memories. From the pages of Howard County Past.
One of the state parks in the county got its start with the help of some young men who needed a job. Richard Holmes explains how an unemployment program benefited the Patapsco Valley State Park.
The Patapsco Valley State Park's early development in Howard County was by the CCC, not the Catonsville Community College, but the Civilian Conservation Corps, President Franklin D. Roosevelt's Tree Army from 1933 to 1942. Supervised by the Army and housed in Army tents to start, they built themselves Army-type wooden barracks. The CCC was an unemployment relief program set up to help combat the Great Depression. It resulted in one of the best forest and park improvement efforts ever accomplished. The unemployed young men, upon joining the CCC, were put to work improving our natural resources and building at our national parks. At Patapsco, the CCC members planted trees and made forest stand improvements to existing woodlands. They also built trails, roads, bridges, camp areas, picnic groves, outdoor stone grills, and the cut stone shelters that you can see there today. These CCC boys were drafted into the military in World War II. And then the CCC camps were used to house conscientious objectors. The Civilian Conservation Corps in Howard County. A step back in time. From the pages of Howard County Past.
Some local commuters found mass transit in the county uncomfortable in the late 1800s. Richard Holmes tells us why in Pages from the Past.
Do you remember Howard County's old Ellicott City streetcars, or trolley cars as they were also known? It was 1898 when trolley line number 9 made its first run into Ellicott City. The first trolleys were open-sided and pulled by horses. The number 9 line proved to be very popular right from its first day of service. It cost 17 cents to ride the 3.5 miles into Catonsville and took only 13 minutes. The trolley line ran from a dead end on Main Street next to the more recent old firehouse, down Main Street and over the trolley bridge across the Patapsco River, which stood just to the north of the traffic bridge. On the other side of the river was the trolley stop for Oella, near to where the trolley stop restaurant sits today. From there, the trolley continued east through the deep cut, whose right-of-way was blasted out of solid rock, and then up the steep hill to Catonsville with connections to Baltimore. Passengers commonly called the trolley the jerkwater because the ride was less than comfortable. Howard County's Ellicott City streetcar service came to an end in 1955 after 57 years of service. From the pages of Howard County Past.
The guardians of the state's forests and parks share a history with roots in the military. Howard County shares the Patapsco State Park. The Hollowfield area of the park is located in this county along Route 40. Richard Holmes explains who's keeping an eye on the forest.
If you have ever visited Howard County's Patapsco State Park, the chances are that you've seen some of Maryland's rangers. Their tradition goes back over 300 years to the earliest colonial times, when the colonial ranger maintained peace between the Native Americans and the colonists along Lord Baltimore's colonial Maryland frontier, in those days the Route 1 corridor. In the 1700s, the rangers patrolled between frontier forts during the French and Indian War. During the Civil War, mounted Maryland Rangers participated in the conflict, mainly on the Confederate side. The main job of Patapsco Park's first mounted forest wardens, as they were then called, was to follow trains to put out fires started by the train sparks. Starting in the 1930s, the forest wardens became forest conservation rangers and had a small force primarily employed to suppress fires. Howard County's Patapsco State Park Rangers, continuing a long tradition of protecting and educating. From the pages of Howard County Past.
Some prisoners of war ended up in Howard County during World War II. Richard Holmes describes the impact they had on this region in Pages from the Past.
Few people are aware of the fact that during World War II, German prisoners of war worked right here in Howard County. During the war, most of Howard County's labor force was serving in the military. Consequently, German prisoners were sent to work as laborers on farms in and around Ellicott City. On June 12, 1944, 50 German POWs were brought into Howard County from Fort Meade. There was soon little doubt that these new laborers worked very hard, and the U.S. Department of Agriculture reports for Howard County indicate that the tomato crop for 1943 was successfully harvested due largely to the efforts of these German prisoners. As the effectiveness of this arrangement became widely accepted, the number of prisoners gradually increased until a peak of 190 per day was reached. When Howard County farmers drove to pick up the prisoners, they would fight to get on board because they knew they would be well treated and well fed. 80% of the German prisoners immigrated here after the war to start life anew. Howard County and its World War II German prisoners. A step back in time. From the pages of Howard County Past.
One location in the county was in the line of fire during the Civil War. Richard Holmes narrates how a piece of military equipment made its way into the county before being stopped in its tracks.
During the first year of the Civil War, Howard County was the scene of a dramatic smuggling and capture operation. General Benjamin Butler, commander of the Union troops in Baltimore, received word that a newly developed steam-powered piece of artillery designed and built in Baltimore by Southern sympathizers was en route to Harper's Ferry by road through Ellicott's Mills, now Ellicott City. This steam gun was to be used by the Confederacy to bring a quick end to the war. General Butler ordered his troops to seize a train traveling from Baltimore to Ellicott's Mills. The soldier-laden train arrived at the station just as the steam gun, disguised as farm machinery, was being maneuvered down Main Street. The gun, pulled by a team of 6 mules, was quickly captured, but its inventor accompanying the gun escaped with essential components, rendering the weapon useless. Howard County, host to an important Civil War capture. From the pages of Howard County Past.
Some urban professionals made a town in Howard County their getaway during the hotter months. Pages from the Past explains how one local community got its name from its residents who took a break from the city and the courtroom.
Lawyers Hill in eastern Howard County's Elkridge was originally settled by Baltimore lawyers as sites for their summer homes. When the Civil War ended, there were almost a dozen families living on Lawyers Hill. Among the earliest built was the Lawn, home of Judge George W. Dobbin. Because he was interested in astronomy, the house included an observatory. He subdivided among his children. Thomas Dobbin, his son, owned Wayside. A daughter owned Maycroft. Judge Dobbin lived here the year round, and soon other lawyers followed suit. John H.B. Latrobe, lawyer for the B&O at the time, was passing through Elkridge with his wife, and he looked across the Thomas Viaduct and saw the hill and thought, what a beautiful place to build a home. They did, and called it Ferry Knowe. It burned down twice. The gates still remain at the foot of Old Lawyers Hill Road. The lawyers built a meeting house for themselves on the hill for social and theatrical events. Lawyers Hill in Elkridge. One of the pages from Howard County Past.
One local group documents how farming has changed over the years. Richard Holmes digs deep into the area's agricultural history in this edition of Pages from the Past.
One big part of Howard County's rich rural past is being nicely preserved for us by the Howard County Antique Farm Machinery Club. They have a big exhibit each year in August at the Howard County Fair, and again in September when they host their annual Farm Heritage Days at the Mount Pleasant Farm on Old Frederick Road in Woodstock. For those of you raised on a farm, seeing this Farm Heritage Days display will be a trip down memory lane. For those of you who grew up in the city, the demonstrations, narrated by real farmers, will be most informative and exciting for both kids and parents alike. The fodder cutting machine turns corn stalks into chopped food for cows. One kid exclaimed, "That's cow salad." Kids can take home samples of fodder. Preserving antique farm machinery and how they work. One of the pages from Howard County Past.
Today, Pages from the Past focuses on the eastern part of the county. We go down memory lane in Elkridge. Richard Holmes narrates.
Howard County's Elkridge has an old main street that time has passed by. In the mid-1800s, the new Washington Turnpike was constructed. This main road from Baltimore to Washington then ran just to the east of today's US 1 in Elkridge, along Main Street. At that time a dirt road, it passed early Main Street merchants such as Pocock's Store, Boyle's Tavern, and Kine's Store. Shopkeepers lived above their stores. Sybert's Store on Main Street was an old country store in front with dry goods and groceries, and in the back were the meats. Eventually the horse-drawn wagons were replaced by automobiles and the mud-filled streets were paved. Another early merchant was Boswell's Store and Post Office. This surviving building on Old Main Street was home to the Elkridge Country Club, and this was Earp's Store and Post Office. Main Street today is now a quiet residential avenue with quaint antique shops. Elkridge's Old Main Street, from the pages of Howard County Past.
Generations of Elkridge residents remember a doctor who made house calls. Pages from the Past takes us to the place where this physician practiced medicine on generations of Elkridge residents. Richard Holmes narrates.
For 60 years, one doctor served the town of Elkridge. He delivered 3 generations of Elkridge babies. At first, Dr. Benjamin Bruce Brumbaugh charged just $2 for an office visit and $3 for a house call. When he retired in 1980, he was still charging only $3 for an office visit. For delivering a baby, he charged only $50. The price went up to $150 later in his career. Dr. Brumbaugh passed away in 1985, but his home and doctor's office have been preserved exactly as he left them and is now the home of the Elkridge Heritage Society. The street next to Dr. Brumbaugh's house carries his name. The good doctor was so popular and beloved that in 1970, his name was entered into the congressional record by the Honorable Gil Goody, a member of the U.S. House of Representatives. It said, "Thank you, Dr. Brumbaugh, for 50 years of care." Howard County's Dr. Benjamin Bruce Brumbaugh, duly recognized in his time. From the pages of Howard County Past.
Well, there's no pulling the wool over your eyes when it comes to an annual tradition that's held in this county. Pages from the Past takes us to a spring festival where a certain mammal rules. Richard Holmes narrates.
The Maryland Sheep and Wool Festival is a national celebration of sheep, an animal that has been important to man and commerce for hundreds of years. First started in 1974, the Sheep and Wool Festival is stronger than ever in attracting participants and spectators from all over the country. Year after year, thousands gather at the Howard County Fairgrounds the first full weekend in May as every aspect of the sheep industry is highlighted. The unique festival is a wonderful opportunity to discover the beauty of sheep, the warmth of wool, and the delicious taste of lamb. After sampling many culinary delights, visitors can wander around the more than 200 craft exhibits to do some shopping. Vendors offer wares that showcase the versatility of sheep products. There are many beautiful, high-quality, unique creations like handcrafted wool garments, sheepskins, exquisite handmade gift items, and a vast array of fleece in every color imaginable. Howard County's annual Sheep and Wool Festival, a continuing event from Howard County past.
There's evidence about how the children of one county family spent their leisure time in the 1800s. Pages from the past documents a place and time when young Howard Countyans worked hard at play. Richard Holmes narrates.
Oakdale, the family mansion of Howard County's prominent Warfield family, was the setting for many pictures taken in the 1890s. This scene shows John Warfield entertaining some children with a story. Then it's down to the Oakdale swimming hole for these four boys. The Oakdale Mill Pond was traversed by three children in a boat named the Belle of Lake Albert, seen here visiting three boys fishing in a dam. The Warfield children took the time to make a homemade seesaw. The girls set up a tea party under a fir tree, while the boys tended to the serious business of a game of marbles, and the light infantry stood at attention. Children at play at the Oakdale estate in the 1890s. A step back in time. From the pages of Howard County Past.
What's now a local shopping establishment once laid the foundation of a town. Pages from the Past takes us to a place where cloth was produced to make things that could be put in the hands of sailors, campers, and even into movie houses. Richard Holmes narrates.
Amos Adams Williams was one of three brothers who originally operated the Savage Manufacturing Company on the Little Patuxent River in southeastern Howard County. It was named for John Savage, the chief investor in 1821. Known as Savage Mill, it became one of the important cotton milling operations in Howard County. The mill manufactured several kinds of cloth, including duct, which was used for sails, hoses, tents, tarps, laundry bags, brake lining for Model T Fords, and backdrops for films. The mill flourished and the town grew up around it. Savage was receiving sewer service as early as 1919. The Savage Company store served the mill families, offering a vast array of items. Across the street from the mill, the Baldwin family built a large summer home, complete with a fine cupola, a wide porch, and handsome shuttered windows. Savage Mill, an important part of Howard County's history. A step back in time. From the pages of Howard County Past.
The way your mail has been handled in this county has changed over the decades. Pages from the Past shows how your correspondence has made its destination over the years. Richard Holmes narrates.
Benjamin Franklin was the country's first Postmaster General, and the first mail service was only from post office to post office, where you went to pick up your mail. In 1896, RFD, Rural Free Delivery, started. Early county general stores often housed post offices, such as the Clarksville Store and Post Office at Route 108 and 10 Oaks Road. Others were Bloom's Corner Store in Old Columbia, where Route 29 now crosses Route 108, and Pindell's Store, which housed the Glenwood Post Office on Route 97, formerly known as Matthews Post Office. Ilchester, one of the smallest post offices in Maryland, was also one of the earliest. While rural mail was delivered by wagon to your box, and still later by early automobile, some innovations were rural delivery by motorbike with sidecar, and, for greater convenience, a mailbox on the side of a trolley. Modern Columbia's first post office was located in a stone house near Wild Lake. How Howard Countyans used to get their mail. A step back in time. From the pages of Howard County Past.
No matter how old you are or how long you've been driving, you've probably had to fill the tank at a gasoline station at some point. Pages from the Past shows us how these stations have changed over the years in the county. Richard Holmes narrates.
Do you remember when gas stations looked like this? The pumps had clear glass at the top to see how much gas was being used. In 1931, this Sunoco station stood at the corner of US 1 and Levering Avenue in Elkridge. They also offered sandwiches and drinks. This Atlantic gas station was located at an old hotel at Pine Orchard on the south side of present-day US 40. In the early 1930s, there was the Thomas Garage and gas station in Cooksville. Business was good on old US Route 40. This 1930s Esso station was located at the intersection of old US Route 29 and US Route 40 in downtown Ellicott City. Later, the county bought the station to widen the road. Typical of its era was this Esso station, built in 1947. It stood on Montgomery Road near Columbia Pike. Howard County's early gas stations, a step back in time. From the pages of Howard County Past.
Not all mansions in Howard County have withstood the test of time. Pages from the Past traces the life of some mansions built in the 1800s. Richard Holmes narrates.
Howard County has had many beautiful mansions. Troy Hill Farm on the northeast corner of Routes 95 and 100 was built in 1820. Longwood, west of Maryland 97 near Glenwood, was built by Dr. Gustavus Warfield about 1820. Fairfields was the home of Thaddeus Clark in the mid-1800s. It stood on the south side of Maryland 108 between US 29 and Centennial Lane, but has not survived. Font Hill from 1875 was on Ilchester Road and was an institution for retarded children. It no longer stands. The Hug Mansion, owned by wealthy Baltimore merchants, stood from 1877 to 1933 when it burned. Burley Manor was built by Resin Hammond about 1800. It still stands on the old Annapolis Road. Oakland was built in 1820 by Charles Stirrett. Still standing, it may be the most impressive historic site in Columbia. Some of the many mansions from Howard County Past.
Howard County plays host to a state park that's provided recreation for county residents and its neighbors. Pages from the Past wades through a river valley for a view of the history of this location.
The Patapsco Valley State Park is one of the most beautiful natural environmental areas in Howard County. Park rangers keep this land safe for all to enjoy throughout the year. Patapsco Valley State Park is comprised of 13,000 acres of parkland. The history of the Patapsco River has been a major portion of this area's folklore. Discovered in 1608 by Captain John Smith, the Patapsco River Valley has seen flour mills built along its banks, terrible wars that affected the inhabitants of the valley, and later, the nation's first railroad. This mighty river that runs through the heart of Patapsco Valley State Park has always provided recreation and physical enjoyment for all who care to visit. Until the invention of air conditioning, the park was a summer escape from the excessive heat of Baltimore. In winter, skaters flocked to Lost Lake in the Avalon area, as shown by this 1970s picture. The Patapsco Valley State Park and the Patapsco River. An important page from Howard County's Past.
You can find out more about the contributions of African Americans to Howard County and this country in general by visiting a local center. Pages from the Past takes us there. Richard Holmes narrates.
The Howard County Center for African American Culture, located on Vantage Point Road in Columbia, seeks to promote greater public awareness of African American history in Howard County. The accomplishments of Howard Countians are spotlighted throughout the center. Local authors have a special place in the museum's 3,000-book library, as do some 90 inventions by African Americans, along with traditional clothing and unique artifacts straight from Africa. Area school children come for special lessons. They also have Black History Month events, such as their youth essay contest on what my heritage means to me. So whether it's a family outing or a field trip, this museum has something of interest for people of all ages and ethnic backgrounds. The Howard County Center for African American Culture in Columbia, one of the keepers of Howard County past.
Railroad passengers through this region could take a break from their travels at a nearby establishment. Pages from the Past describes this early facility where travelers could eat and sleep. Richard Holmes narrates.
Viaduct House and Relay Station, situated on the Baltimore County end of the Thomas Viaduct, sat between the forks of the Western Maryland and Washington lines of the B&O Railroad. Around 1860, the first Viaduct House was built and provided the evening meal to railroad travelers and overnight accommodations only for sick or fatigued passengers. During the Civil War, Union soldiers at Viaduct House searched westbound trains en route to Harper's Ferry. In 1872, construction of a new combined larger station and hotel was begun at Relay. Here, two travelers buy tickets inside Relay Station about 1908. The introduction of railroad sleeping cars made elegant old railroad hotels obsolete after 1890. But Relay Station stayed open until 1908 after 108 years of continuous service. In 1950, the magnificent old Gothic hotel and train station were torn down. Viaduct House and Relay Station. A step back in time. From the pages of Howard County Past.
Howard County has its share of mansions. Some are still around and others are long gone. Pages from the Past looks at the history of more mansions in this area. Richard Holmes narrates.
Continuing our look at Howard County mansions, one splendid example is Wilton, an Italian villa-style home built in the 1850s by William H.G. Dorsey. It was located near the interchange of routes I-70 and US 29. It burned in 1939. Folly Farm, once owned by Charles Carroll, was given by him to his granddaughter. It's located where Folly Quarter Road, east of Glenelg, makes a right-angle turn. Waveland is located not far from Oakland Mills Road. Larkin Dorsey built this home in the early 1800s. Woodlawn, which stands near US 29 and Frederick Avenue, was once the home of John T. W. Dorsey. Stockwood was the home of Dr. Thomas Galen Stockett before 1860. Today, this is the location of Howard High School. Howard County's many mansions. A step back in time. From the pages of Howard County Past.
Even animals have played a part in the history of Howard County. Pages from the Past looks at how some four-legged mammals kept some Howard Countyans at work and play. Richard Holmes weaves this horse tale.
The horse has always been associated with growth and expansion of any area. One of the earliest uses of the horse in what we now call Howard County was as mounts for the first forest wardens. As Howard County grew, the horse and buggy was the popular means of transportation, and horses were the farm power. If you had horses, you needed a blacksmith shop, such as this one at Highland Junction, which also housed a wheelwright. The harness shop on Main Street in Ellicott's Mills was a must for any horse owner. The S.W. Burgess Carriage and Wagon Works served the needs of the horse owner. Horsepower ranged from multi-horse teams down to a pony pulling a child's cart. For pleasure, there were events like this steeplechase at Doregan Manor in 1932 and the activities of the very large Elkridge Hunt Club. The horse and Howard County. A step back in time. From the pages of Howard County Past.
Traveling in Howard County took on new meaning when cars showed up on the scene. Pages from the Past shows us some of the early owners of these four-wheeled vehicles. Richard Holmes narrates.
Among the first automobiles in Howard County were those belonging to Governor Warfield. His chauffeur and his wife are seen here in one of them. This group is out for a spin about 1905 in a Perry, a custom-built car made in Maryland. This driver motored down to Laurel in June 1909. If you owned a car, then from time to time you would need the services of an auto repair garage, such as the Green Cross Garage in Ellicott City. It's fun to see all the modern equipment inside the Green Cross Garage in 1920. Also in the 20s, Scott Starr, Undertaker, showed off his limousine, hearse, and 2 touring cars. He also rented automobiles. In 1930, Clara and Aubrey Fleming paid $700 for this Ford Coupe. In 1942, a Cadillac Fleetwood transported this family for a picnic. The automobile and Howard County. A step back in time. From the pages of Howard County Past.
Some wealthy Howard Countyans became richer during the 1700s by investing in metal production in Elkridge. Pages from the Past describes how even Europeans benefited from this hot industry in Howard County. Richard Holmes narrates.
In the area that was to become Howard County, as well as the rest of the colonies, the iron industry was one of America's earliest, largest, and most productive industrial enterprises. 65 iron furnaces existed in Virginia and Maryland in the colonial period. The colonies were the world's 3rd largest producer of pig iron. The clay soil around Howard County's Patapsco River Valley was rich in iron ore. In 1755, ironmaster Caleb Dorsey established the Elkridge furnace. Wealthy tobacco planters such as the Carrolls, the Ridgeleys, and the Hammonds invested in the iron industry. The return on their investments often surpassed their incomes from the tobacco trade. Elkridge Landing was at its peak as a colonial town in the decades following 1750. A typical 18th century Maryland furnace required a labor force of about 70 workers. Skilled laborers were hard to find. Many of the workers were slaves that belonged to the furnace. By 1756, Dorsey's coal blast charcoal burning furnace produced over 1,000 tons of pig iron. Most of it was shipped to England.
Home and farm took on new meaning in the county when a new club started for young people in the early 1900s. Pages from the Past describes how this organization has blossomed in a field of clovers.
1919 marked the first year of Howard County's 4-H clubs. It was established as a nationwide system of education for children in rural communities. Loyalty, clear reasoning, kindness, and becoming better citizens are constantly emphasized. Members receive education from the school 4-H clubs and also from 4-H clubs in various communities. They also participate in numerous activities and competitions. Projects involve livestock, home economics, and other domestic and agricultural activities. Each club prepares their own 4-H float to promote their club in the annual Howard County Fair Parade. The fair gives 4-H members an opportunity to show off what they have learned and accomplished. They are also eligible to compete at the Maryland State Fair. A 4-leaf clover is the 4-H club's emblem. The 4-H's stand for head, heart, hands, and health. The club's mottos are to make the best better and to learn by doing. During World War II, membership in 4-H clubs rose dramatically. Here, 4-H members show off their victory garden in 1942. The 4-H clubs through the years. A step back in time. From the pages of Howard County Past.
Ships loaded up at the seaport before heading to Europe. Pages from the Past now docks at the place from where tobacco planters sent their wares off to markets overseas. Richard Holmes narrates.
It's hard to imagine that the Patapsco River was ever deep enough for sailing ships. But in the 1700s, for a distance of 20 miles from the Chesapeake Bay, the Patapsco River was navigable to ocean-going vessels. The river's average depth was 14 feet. A 250-foot lagoon allowed ships to turn around. The river port, known as Elkridge Landing, developed as a wharf for farmers to bring their tobacco to load aboard ships for exportation to England. Slaves or oxen would roll large barrels called hogsheads containing as much as a ton of tobacco down a network of rolling roads to the Patapsco River. The town started with a custom house, inspection office, and tobacco warehouses. Elkridge Landing was a small port, but a prosperous one, second only to Annapolis for exporting tobacco. the early years of Elkridge Landing and the Patapsco River Valley. A step back in time. From the pages of Howard County Past.
One county town played its part in America's revolt against Britain. Pages from the Past takes us to Elkridge, where weapons were formed for the American Army.
During the Revolutionary War, Caleb Dorsey's Elkridge Furnace and Forge produced cannons for Washington's army. While the Elkridge Furnace operated on the Howard County side of the river, the Dorseys operated a forge on the other side. They took raw iron over there and made crowbars and axes out of it. Later, the Ellicotts developed the Avalon Nail Works, where the Avalon area of the state park is today. In the early 1800s, the Ellicotts bought the Dorsey Forge and expanded it. They also developed a mill race, a man-made waterway like a canal, to transport iron ore from the hills by water. It was easier than transporting by horse or mule. By the mid-1800s, the iron industry was fading. The flood of 1868 washed away much of the furnace and forge. Marine archaeologists researching lost ports of the Chesapeake may have uncovered a piece of the lost era. They discovered some stone jetties in the Avalon area that may be the remains of the wharf that serviced the iron industry. Today, the Elkridge Furnace Inn is preserved as a reminder of this bygone era. A step back in time. From the pages of Howard County Past.
Pages from the Past continues its stop in Elkridge. We learn how some members of the African American community lived, learned, and traveled on their way to freedom. Richard Holmes narrates.
In the 1800s, many of Elkridge's prominent African American farmers lived on Race Road. Some of them were former slaves who were willed their freedom, land, or money upon the master's death. The Gaines AME Church and Oddfellows Lodge next door on Montgomery Road served as the schoolhouse for the African American children of Elkridge. At times, African American teachers from outside the county came to Elkridge to educate the children. This used to be the house in which the teachers resided during the week. It was owned by the Fitzgeralds. They would then go home on the weekends. They would stay in the homes of African Americans because they couldn't stay in hotels. In 1830, the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad was running trains along the Patapsco River across from Elkridge Landing. This made for an easy escape for African American slaves seeking freedom. It was easy for runaways to jump on a train heading north. If they left on a Friday, they could be in Canada by Monday. Part of the early African American experience in Elkridge. A step back in time. From the pages of Howard County Past.
Well, at the end of a hard day, Howard County's forefathers and their families needed a good place to call home. Some of them built impressive mansions, many of which remain standing today. Richard Holmes tells us more as he flips through the pages from the past.
Continuing our look at Howard County's many mansions, another fine example is Mount Ida, built in the 1830s by William Ellicott. It still stands today as a museum near the courthouse parking lot. Elkridge Farm, built during the Depression, was once owned by Brooker Clark. Located on Montgomery Road outside Ellicott City, it is no longer standing. Oak Lawn was constructed in the early 1840s in Ellicott City by Edwin Parsons Hayden. It was incorporated into a recently enlarged courthouse. Chatham, home of Thomas Watkins Ligon, was built for his daughter. It was later sold to Joseph Natwick, who renamed it Dunlogan. Eventually it was torn down. In Savage, the Baldwin family built themselves this summer home. Today, the building is apartments. Grovemont was located in Ilchester. Since 1912, it has been a school under various names. Glen Elg was first built as the country estate of General and Mrs. Washington Tyson in the 1850s. It is currently an expanded private school. More of Howard County's many mansions. A step back in time. From the pages of Howard County Past.
The Howard County town of Daniels has a long history of music. In fact, they boast the oldest community band in the nation. Richard Holmes tells us more in Pages from the Past.
Howard County has a ghost town, the late village of Daniels on the Patapsco River. But a part of that old town comes to life every Monday night at the Daniels Band rehearsal. It's held in the Gary Memorial Methodist Church, the last Daniels building still standing. Started as the Albertson Cornet Band in 1879, this company-owned mill town changed names as new ownership took over and was renamed Daniels. The Daniels Town Band is one of the oldest continuous community bands in the country. In the early days, the band was the town's major entertainment and had a bandstand in the town's tiny square. The band also played background music when silent movies came to town. But the big day remained the 4th of July, when the band would lead the parade, marching nearly a mile to the area known as Picnic Woods. Today, with many members in their senior years, they don't march anymore. But play they do, about a dozen times a year. Howard County's Daniels Band, continuing over 100 years of tradition. One of the pages from Howard County Past.
Some of the county's older buildings still stand after a century or two of being in existence. This edition of Pages from the Past takes us on a visual tour of 7 such locations. We see how these structures are being used today despite the wear and tear of the centuries. Richard Holmes narrates.
Perhaps the most unusual building in all of Howard County is Angelo's Cottage, also called the Castle. It is perched above the Patapsco River, overlooking Main Street in Ellicott City, and dates from the 1830s. Not far away, Ellicott City's first firehouse was constructed in 1889 at Church and Main Streets. Today it houses the Firehouse Museum. In 1878, Ellicott City built this new jail with a capacity of 16 prisoners. It is still in use today, but expanded. This old Quaker meeting house was built in 1799 in Ellicott City and is still standing. It was later used as a public school, private school, and as a residence. Gilchester had 2 unusual buildings. Here is the observatory on Astral Heights behind St. Mary's College. The other was this tiny post office, one of the smallest in Maryland. The Red House Tavern on Old Frederick Road dates from 1795 and still sits near I-70 and Route 97. It served travelers going between Frederick and Baltimore that had to stop and pay at this toll gate house. Unusual Howard County buildings. A step back in time. From the pages of Howard County Past.
Some county residents learned their 3 R's in schoolhouses before the mid-1900s. Pages from the Past tells us more about these locations where school kids received their public education. Richard Holmes narrates.
Howard County's old Meadow Ridge Schoolhouse for African American students on Meadow Ridge Road in Elkridge is occupied today as a private residence. The Oakland Mills Schoolhouse later served as a home for many years. Here, the door has been relocated from the end of the building to the front. The first consolidated school in Howard County opened in West Friendship in 1925. Elementary students didn't have to pay for the bus ride, but high school students did. It was later torn down. The first Clarksville High School building was opened in 1914. It stood on Maryland Route 108 on the south side of the road near the fire station. It was later demolished. This school was operated for African American children near the present Howard High School at Jonestown by 1900. Later abandoned, it is no longer standing. Behind the Mount Gregory United Methodist Church on Maryland Route 97 near Cooksville, an industrial school for African American youths was built in 1920. Early public schoolhouses in Howard County. A step back in time. From the pages of Howard County Past.
Some of the county's faith communities worship in buildings that date back to the 18th and 19th centuries. Pages from the Past now takes you on a video tour of some of these houses of worship. Richard Holmes narrates.
Howard County's old brick Christ Episcopal Church was founded back in the early 1700s under the Church of England. This structure was built in 1809, replacing an earlier log building. Francis Asbury, the first Methodist bishop in the U.S., visited Elkridge as early as 1772, resulting in the formation of the Melville Methodist Church on Furnace Avenue. The congregation built this house of worship in 1834. Emory Methodist Church was founded in 1837 as Emory Chapel of the Methodist Episcopal Church at Ellicott's Mills. It still stands on Church Road in Ellicott City. St. Peter's Episcopal Church in Ellicott City was founded in 1842. They consecrated this brick structure in 1854. Locust Chapel stood on Ilchester Road at the corner of Landing Road. Long before 1860, this chapel served the old established community of Ilchester. It was torn down over 50 years ago. Union Chapel was formed in 1833 in Glenwood. In 1886, the chapel was in the Lisbon Circuit of the Methodist Church. Today it has been completely restored and is used for worship by an Episcopal congregation. Some early churches and chapels in Howard County. A step back in time. From the pages of Howard County Past.
Pages from the Past goes next door. You're about to learn about a nearby town with a history that rivals its neighbor, Ellicott City. Richard Holmes narrates.
Howard County's nearest neighbor is the old mill town of Oella that sits just outside the eastern entrance to Ellicott City, just across the Main Street Bridge. Protected by its rugged terrain, Oella nestles 90 acres on the thickly wooded slopes of a narrow, steep valley carved by the Patapsco River. Its hillside homes of log, stone, brick, and wood embrace the span of mill village architecture from before the War of 1812 to after World War I. The village arose out of the efforts of the Union Manufacturing Company to establish the first textile corporation chartered by the state legislature. For a brief period, the company boasted the largest cotton mill in the United States. It was powered by the water carried in a 1 3/4 mile mill race, probably the longest in America, that serviced only one mill. The village of Oella is named after the first woman to spin cotton in America. Oella, Howard County's nearest neighbor to the east. A step back in time. From the pages of Howard County Past.
Pages from the Past goes next door. You're about to learn about a nearby town with a history that rivals its neighbor, Ellicott City. Richard Holmes narrates.
Howard County's nearest neighbor is the old mill town of Oella that sits just outside the eastern entrance to Ellicott City, just across the Main Street Bridge. Protected by its rugged terrain, Oella nestles 90 acres on the thickly wooded slopes of a narrow, steep valley carved by the Patapsco River. Its hillside homes of log, stone, brick, and wood embrace the span of mill village architecture from before the War of 1812 to after World War I. The village arose out of the efforts of the Union Manufacturing Company to establish the first textile corporation chartered by the state legislature. For a brief period, the company boasted the largest cotton mill in the United States. It was powered by the water carried in a 1 3/4 mile mill race, probably the longest in America, that serviced only one mill. The village of Oella is named after the first woman to spin cotton in America. Oella, Howard County's nearest neighbor to the east. A step back in time. From the pages of Howard County Past.
You can find some county residents on the march on Main Street, Ellicott City in the last century. Pages from the Past takes us on the north side of that thoroughfare for a look at how that street has changed over the years. Richard Holmes narrates.
Ellicott City's early 20th century Main Street had plenty of room for horse-drawn vehicles. The tallest building on Main Street has had many identities, including New Town Hall and the Opera House. This early frame Main Street building was replaced by a brick structure around 1926. The Howard House Hotel on Main Street was a smaller structure in the 19th century. In the 20th century, it was converted to an apartment house. In the 1920s, Scott Starr built this brick building for his undertaking business. The bygone trolley traveled as far as the old fire station on Main Street before reversing direction and going back over the trolley bridge to Catonsville. This was the early interior of the Patapsco Bank on Main Street. A World War II-era parade led by the Boy Scouts marches down Main Street past the old police station. The Maryland Minutemen march up Main Street in this 1943 Memorial Day parade. Remembrances of the north side of Ellicott City's Main Street. A step back in time. From the pages of Howard County Past.
Pages from the Past now takes you down History Lane along the south side of Main Street, Ellicott City. Last week we traveled on the north side. As always, Richard Holmes narrates.
Ellicott City's early 20th century Main Street experienced the changeover from horse-drawn vehicles to early automobiles. The south side of Lower Main Street had small wooden frame stores in the early 20th century. This photograph, taken in the early 1900s, shows the new Washington Trust Bank. In 1940, at the intersection of Columbia Pike and Main Street, the signpost clearly shows routes 29 and 40. The Ellicott Theater was built after an April 1940 fire destroyed Berger's Grocery and De Wong's Laundry. This row of buildings was torn down to construct the post office. Miller Chevrolet, at their then new location on Main Street, collected tires during World War II. The Earl Theater, built in the 1920s, stood here until destroyed by fire in 1941. Before the 1984 fire, these 5 buildings stood between the bank and Pickwick Papers. The post office lobby contains large murals depicting local history. The Green Cross Garage stood behind the post office. It burned down in 1992. Hollywood came to Ellicott City and filmed this scene on Main Street in 1958. Remembrances of the south side of Ellicott City's Main Street. A step back in time. From the pages of Howard County Past.
Pages from the Past takes us around historic Ellicott City this time around. We see how one avenue played a part in the life of Howard Countyans. Richard Holmes narrates.
Trains pulled into the Ellicott City B&O Railroad Station for many years. In this photograph, circa the early 1900s, the station master has freight ready to be loaded. Behind the station on Maryland Avenue were small wooden frame stores. The original location of the Patapsco Bank was St. Paul Street at Maryland Avenue. It moved to Main Street in the 1800s. Across St. Paul Street stood St. Paul's Roman Catholic Church and the buildings of Rock Hill College. St. Peter's Episcopal Church stood to the rear of St. Paul's for nearly 100 years. When it burned around 1939, it was rebuilt on Rogers Avenue. By 1890, Rock Hill College had grown from a small 1820s boys' school into this large and impressive granite structure. After Rock Hill College was destroyed by fire in 1923, granite from the ruins was used to build the new Ellicott City High School. Remembrances of Ellicott City's Maryland Avenue area. A step back in time. From the pages of Howard County Past.
We continue our segment on the history of Howard County, but Pages from the Past is turning into 150 years of history. It's our part in the county's celebration of its sesquicentennial. Today we go down another road in Ellicott City. It's a location visited by a well-known general associated with a famous artist, and one that provides inspiration to those who travel there. Richard Holmes narrates.
In the triangular lot between Main Street and Church Road stands Ellicott City's first fire station, constructed in 1889. This is how the original Emory Methodist Church on Church Road looked in 1838. It was remodeled 50 years later. Dr. Isaac Martin, the well-known and prominent druggist, built this house on Church Road at Emory Street in the 1880s. Here a man is holding Dr. William Hodge's horse in front of the old Presbyterian parsonage known as the Old Manse. The romantic Angelo's Cottage on Church Road was named for Michelangelo. This castle-like home was built around 1883. At the end of Church Road stands a large stone house called Linwood. It was built before 1850 and was often visited by General Robert E. Lee. Ellicott City's Church Street, part of Howard County's 150 years of history.
We continue our celebration of the sesquicentennial with a visit to an avenue most frequented by those who help uphold and defend the law. We learn what landmarks surround this area known by those who seek justice. Richard Holmes tells us about Court Avenue's place in Howard County's history.
This is how Ellicott City's courthouse looked in 1843. It was enlarged in 1938-39 and again more extensively in 1988. Next to the courthouse on Court Avenue sits the former First Presbyterian Church. It was built in 1894 with granite from local quarries. The former church is now the home of the Howard County Historical Society's museum. The library of the Howard County Historical Society is housed in this old schoolhouse building next to the museum. It housed the Quaker School as early as 1790. Also near the courthouse stood the city's first high school. It was torn down in 1926. The green cupola building on the side of and below the courthouse was the county's 1878 jail. Mount Ida stands near the courthouse rear parking lot. It was built in 1830 and is now the headquarters of the Friends of the Patapsco Institute. Built in 1836 to house a school, it later became the Patapsco Female Institute from 1841 to 1891. This 57-room granite building is now a restored ruin open to the public. Ellicott City's Court Avenue, part of Howard County's 150 years of history.
Today we go down Columbia Pike in Ellicott City as we review the county's history over the past 150 years. We learn how this thruway played a part in the early years and the end of life for county residents. Richard Holmes narrates.
Ellicott City's Columbia Pike dead ends into Main Street opposite the Howard House. The gas station was removed when Columbia Pike was widened. On the corner, the old stone portion of the Taylor Furniture Store was built in the 1860s. The assorted buildings on the east side of Columbia Pike have seen many changes. Across the street sits the quaint Tongue Row, built in the 1840s by the widow Ann Tongue. The 1799 Quaker Meeting House on Columbia Pike closed over 150 years ago. It later served as a public school, hospital, and private school. The Craft Home on Columbia Pike was enlarged for the Higginbotham Funeral Home. Today it is the Slack Funeral Home. Ellicott City's Columbia Pike, part of Howard County's 150 years of history.
You'll walk the path of law enforcers, students, and a Quaker family when you go down this lane in Ellicott City. We learn how a local thoroughfare affected the lives of Howard Countyans through the decades. Richard Holmes narrates in this tribute to the county's 150 years of history.
This is how Ellicott City's Fels Lane looked before the demolition of the houses to build Ellicott Mills Drive. This is Fels Lane looking south towards Main Street. The street was named for the Quaker family of Ezra Fell. The old houses on the west side of Lower Fels Lane had deteriorated to the extent that they were considered unsafe. A 1965 fire took the lives of 5 people. Years later, the county bought the old houses and demolished them. The area was leveled and later paved to become the parking lot behind the old fire station on Main Street. The displaced Fels Lane residents were relocated to the new Hilltop apartments that were built to provide housing for Howard County residents. In 1965, a building known then as the former Fels Lane Colored School housed the Howard County Police Department that moved there from Main Street. This building is now part of the Roger Carter Rec Center, turning Ellicott City's Fels Lane into Ellicott Mills Drive, part of Howard County's 150 years of history.
Our 150 Years of History segment takes us to more houses of Howard Countyans through the centuries. We visit log cabins, farmhouses, as well as a manor house. Richard Holmes narrates.
As we continue our look at old homes of Howard County, Iris Hill in Columbia stands to the east of Route 29. It was also known as White Hall and Worthington's Addition. A typical country Victorian-style farmhouse, Gaither's Chance, was built around an original 2-story log cabin. Wheatfields was the home of the James Clark family for 80 years and was the site of their family reunion seen here in 1889. After the Civil War, Oliver Amos built a log cabin for his family and later added this front addition, typical of farmhouses of that era. The railroad opened up the Patapsco Valley, and towns developed along its tracks, like this Woodstock home seen here in 1911. In this 1895 photo, Ellicott family members at Rockland Farm posed for their picture. Sapland Range was the homestead of Levin I.G. Owings on Triadelphia Road and is in use today. Here is the manor house on the River Hill Game Preserve, upon which Columbia's River Hill Village was built. The land originally was part of a larger tract known as White Wine and Claret. Old homes in Howard County, part of its 150 years of history.
The Brown, Moxley, Gorman, Ellicott, and Sykes families have made Howard County their home over the centuries. We visit the houses of these families in this edition of 150 Years of History.
Continuing our look at old homes of Howard County, this lovely stone house called the Lindens was the home of the Sykes family. This old home, no longer standing, stood near St. Augustine Catholic Church. It served as a hotel in 1860. This is one of the oldest surviving houses in Poplar Springs, but it looks considerably different today. Joseph Ellicott's home at the Upper Mills was still standing close to the railroad tracks in this 1911 photo. It was built in 1775. Fairview is the name of the former Gorman family home on Gorman Road circa 1911. In the early 1900s, the Moxley family and friends gathered in front of their home, Mount Etna. This is the Owen Brown home located on the road that bears his name. The YMCA purchased this house on Montgomery Road in 1963 toward further expansion. Old homes, part of Howard County's 150 years of history.
What was happening in the lives of some local vets as they served their country during times of war or military action? You can find out through a local exhibit. Here are the details in today's 150 Years of History segment. As always, Richard Holmes narrates.
The Elkridge Heritage Society has a powerful display honoring veterans who live or who have lived in Elkridge, Hanover, Jessup, Relay, and Ilchester. The display covers veterans starting back as far as the Revolutionary War through Desert Storm. The Society attractively displays memorabilia from the residents' military careers, including photos, citations, medals, insignia, uniforms, telegrams, the wartime V-mail, and newspaper reprints of wartime headlines. Also unit yearbooks and special display boards honoring veterans who died for their country or suffered wounds including loss of limbs. The military has loaned many special frame displays for this exhibit. Inscribed wall plaques listing honor rolls of veterans have been secured for viewing, and flags and banners of the various services are on display. Of special interest are the written memoirs of these servicemen, instilling in any reader deep appreciation of the sacrifices which they made for our country. Over 150 responses included many interesting, some tragic, some humorous anecdotes written by servicemen or their survivors. The Elkridge Heritage Society is located in the Brumbaugh House at 5825 Main Street, Elkridge. Our veterans, such an important part of Howard County's 150 years of history.
Howard County, George Howard, Dorsey, Tyson, Ligon, names identifying the county, county government buildings, or rooms in those facilities. Who are they named after? We find out in 150 Years of History. Richard Holmes narrates.
Among the faces of those who shaped Howard County was Charles Carroll, signer of the Declaration of Independence. Dr. Charles Alexander Warfield, when a recent graduate of the University of Pennsylvania, participated in the burning of the Peggy Stewart in 1774 in Annapolis Harbor. John Eager Howard, for whom this county was named, was a Revolutionary War hero, governor, and U.S. Senator. Major Andrew Ellicott was a surveyor and marked the boundaries of the District of Columbia. He also taught mathematics at West Point. Judge Thomas Beale Dorsey was born in 1780. A lawyer, he was a state delegate, senator, attorney general, and chief judge of the Court of Appeals. Martha Ellicott Tyson was born in 1795. She wrote historical accounts of her family and was one of the founders of Swarthmore College. George Howard, son of John Eager Howard, served as governor from 1831 to 1833. Thomas Watkins Ligon was elected governor from 1854 to 1858. Well educated, he was also a lawyer. Faces from the early years of what became Howard County, part of its 150 years of history.
The people who influenced the county's history range through the generations. 150 years of history tells us about some of those people who had an imprint on Howard County.
Continuing our look at people who helped shape Howard County, Dr. Arthur Pugh, Jr. built the House Timora in 1857 when he was about 50 years old. William Winchester Welling, who lived from 1813 to 1882, resided in the stone house Clifton, built in 1818 by his father. William Henry Goodwin Dorsey was a son of Judge Thomas Beale Dorsey. He built the home Wilton and was an attorney. Amos Adams Williams and two of his brothers chartered the Savage Manufacturing Company in 1821. This beautiful young lady, Alberta Gary, died of a fever at age 6. The Gary Memorial Church was named in her honor. John Lee Carroll was born in 1830. An attorney, he served as governor from 1876 to 1880. He lived at Doregan Manor. Edwin Warfield owned and edited the Howard County Times from 1882 to 1886. He also served as senator and governor. 4 children of Sally Gorsuch and William Davis of Ivy Hill in Marriotsville were photographed in 1873. The parents ran a county store. More faces from the early years of what became Howard County, part of its 150 years of history.
Today on 150 Years of History, we look at more people who played a part in the history of Howard County. Richard Holmes narrates while taking us down memory lane of the county's sesquicentennial events.
Continuing our look at people who helped shape Howard County, the Lawyers Club of Baltimore, seen here in the mid-1800s, had 3 members who were residents of Lawyers Hill. Samuel and Ruth Davis Brown, shown here about 1907, were descendants of Ranger Thomas Brown, who in 1690 was assigned to protect early settlers in what is Howard County today. George Gaither Talbot was the youngest of 8 daughters and 2 sons who lived at Gaither's Chance until 1852. The home in Dayton is now called Great Expectations. Young people enjoyed a Sunday picnic in the 1890s at a farm called Rockland in the western part of the county. John Joseph and Hannah Driver Fleming lived on a large farm near Poplar Springs. Of Swedish ancestry, they were born in the 1850s. What was more fun than to dress up silly and go out on a picnic? About 1910, Willie Carr and Beulah E. Haynes Hunt did just that. This late 19th century photo captures members of the Sykes family outside their home, the Lindens. In May 1907, Mark Twain visited Governor Edwin Warfield. More faces from the early years of what became Howard County, part of its 150 years of history.
Local fire departments were kept busy in the early 1940s by 2 train wrecks in Howard County. We find out how firefighters and rescuers handled those incidents in our 150 Years of History segment. Richard Holmes narrates.
In 1943, Howard County's Marriotsville had the misfortune to have 2 severe train wrecks at almost the same location just 3 months apart. The first occurred on the morning of February 17th when 18 freight cars and a locomotive jumped the tracks at the Marriotsville station. Several of the cars completely demolished a stone house nearby. 2 elderly women who were occupants of the dwelling suffered from shock. A fire started among the cars and debris. The blaze was quickly brought under control by the Ellicott City and Woodstock College fire departments. 3 months later, on May 15th, 5 10,000-gallon tank cars loaded with crude oil and 3 cars carrying automobiles were destroyed by fire at almost the same location. Burning oil ran into the Patapsco River and endangered several homes. Fire departments from Baltimore and Carroll counties responded to Ellicott City's request for mutual aid. Hose lines were supplied with water from the river. Marriotsville twin railroad disasters in 1943. Part of Howard County's 150 years of history.
The vehicles owned by county residents changed over the years. 150 years of history now brings out a parade of trucks. You'll see what part these vehicles played in the county through the decades. Richard Holmes narrates.
Trucks have played an important part in the development of Howard County. Here's a shot at the railroad siding along Maryland Avenue in Ellicott City early in the last century. Howard County sent a float on a truck to the opening of the state bridge over the Severn River in 1924, thanks to our extension service. Trucks, of course, had to be serviced, and Ellicott City's Green Cross Garage helped take care of those needs. One of the first motorized fire trucks helps battle the Gambrel Mill fire next door to Ellicott City in 1916. Ellicott City's first motorized fire engine was this 1924 model, which cost $10,500. In 1925, rural students could ride a school bus. Elementary students rode for free. High school students paid $4 a month. Miller Chevrolet in Ellicott City, then on Main Street, used their big truck to collect tires for the war effort during World War II. In 1948-49, Santaheim and Savage used these tractor-trailer trucks in connection with their manufacturing of Christmas ornaments at the Savage Mill. They also had this reindeer zoo. Early trucks in Howard County, part of its 150 years of history.
Well, Howard County's history sometimes played a part in the nation's story. We now learn more about those times in today's edition of 150 Years of History.
There are many significant dates to remember as Howard County celebrates this sesquicentennial year. In 1700, Elkridge Landing was a seaport rivaling Annapolis. It was established as a town in 1734. In 1772, the Ellicott brothers, Joseph, Andrew, and John, arrived from Bucks County, Pennsylvania, to establish mills along the Patapsco River. The town of Ellicott's Mills was founded. 1776 saw Charles Carroll of Doregan Manor signing the Declaration of Independence for Maryland. In 1830, the first railroad station in America was built at Ellicott's Mills. In 1831, Peter Cooper's early locomotive, Tom Thumb, initiated the use of steam power at the B&O station in Ellicott's Mills, and America's railroad age began. In 1851, Howard became a separate county, with the county seat at Ellicott's Mills, where the present courthouse had been built in 1843. 1862, Ellicott City was the scene of a Civil War episode in which the Winans Steam Gun was captured, and federal troops were stationed at Relay to protect the Thomas Viaduct. Important dates in Howard County, part of its 150 years of history.